Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunwerks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
All right, we're on with another episode of Long Range Pursuit Podcast. And, ballistics has been, I would say from day one, it really was more of the impetus for the creation of Gunwerks than the rifles were. Would I be accurate saying that? I mean, you talk about your project in college with
I think that's a true statement, because that is it's the saying goes, only accurate rifles are interesting. Yeah. One of my greatest pet peeves is interchanging precision and accuracy. Yep. Because I find precise rifles very boring.
Sure. You want to hit
if you're talking about precision, it's like, okay, whatever, fine. Yeah. Right. I think it's very boring stuff to talk about. And that's why I fight internally in our company. Yeah. We don't sell on group size. I think it's stupid. I think it's something that we should be past 10 years ago.
Right. It's a given, right? If it's not even part of the conversation.
It should be a given. Shooting. I mean, it should be a given. But accuracy, that's what drives everything about Gunwerks. It's how do you put a bullet on a target in whatever conditions and whatever distance in whatever situation.
Sure.
It's like that, to me, is the most interesting problem to solve, because there is no end in sight.
Yeah. And essentially, if you're starting with a platform that's shooting precisely, to achieve that accuracy at any range, you've got to have the ballistic system in place, right? So, I mean, I guess that's kind of where we're going with this is, you started out, we had that old G7 program for years. I mean, it was groundbreaking at the time. A lot of guys used it.
It was called G7 because it was one of the first programs that offered a solution using the G7 form factor.
Yeah.
And at the time, there was only 2 or 3 bullets, that had been documented, and the manufacturers were providing, BCs in G7 format.
Right. That makes sense. So, I mean, we've obviously grown and evolved a lot over the years, and we've got basically the replacement for that program is the Revic Ops App. So essentially, we've moved over to an app-based system, a lot more easy, right? Everybody's got a smartphone in their pocket. Yep. Hopefully, it's an Android or an iPhone. Probably 95% of what guys have are that. And so we've got a much more advanced, modern, accessible ballistic tool in our pockets now with that Revic Ops app. And on top of that, interfaces with all of our Revic devices, BR4, the PMR, upcoming products.
Not just interfaces, but that engine exists in those products.
Yeah. Right.
It's in fact, if you back up a little bit, the PMR is the project where we developed that algorithm.
Yeah.
So we had to do a ballistic algorithm, and at the time, we could have said, like a lot of people, it's like, hey, let's just buy this other program from somebody else and run it.
Sure.
But as soon as you do that, you lose control.
Yeah.
Right. You lose the ability to change and update and drive the conversation and improve.
Yeah.
Right. And so I didn't want to do that. And it cost more, to do that development.
Sure.
But what we did, like in the original G7 program, long ago story, we developed that to put on the G7 BR2 rangefinder. Mm-hmm. That was an existing professional measurement product. Like the system architecture was there.
Yeah.
There was only this much space for memory, this much capability for processor. We could not put a real ballistic solver on the device.
Huh.
It actually used a 110-year-old methodology called the Sayaki Method. Okay. To do the ballistic calculations, and it's solid. It's good. I mean, people used to lob artillery a long way, 20 miles with that program and hit things.
Right.
So we're only trying to shoot 1,000 yards, like it's doable. But essentially what the Sayaki method is it's a set of tables and some, call it interpolation lookup routines that get you a result. So it's easier on processor power. And if you look at the limitation in profiles on that first device, that's because if you built those profiles, It was full.
Really?
That was it. There was no more space available. Then that's what drove that limitation.
Yeah.
That program was awesome. And when we built it in a device, it's super hard to validate a program. It's just because you have to see all the parameters. And so what we did was we actually developed one of the first mobile ballistic apps in conjunction with the BR2. So it was on a Windows Mobile 6 platform, and it was cool, man. It had you'd use a stylus, and it had like your different screens and your outputs. And I actually wish that I had saved one of those. I bet I couldn't even find one.
Have one, huh?
No, but it was a really cool program in how simple it was. We even did our own keyboard on the bottom. It was just one row of numbers.
Sure.
And a period. They were always there, right? So it didn't have pop-ups. And I think there may have been a military program that Horus was doing at the time. That they maybe had white labeled a couple times, but literally that was all that existed in the marketplace. And we developed that one. But the only reason we did it really was so that we could do field verification. Really important for us was corrections with different environmental conditions. And because we were trying to measure the incline, pressure, temperature on the device with the BR4, you actually had to go to those conditions to take those measurements, and then you'd input those into the mobile device, validate that you're getting the same solutions.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But we even had a shoot-to solution in that original G7 program on that mobile app. And so we took that and we turned it into an online program just so people had some access to it. I mean, once you've got the math done, the interface on the web page is pretty easy. Yeah. So we did that for a lot of years, and it kind of it was done for us and our customers, but we also had a couple of big customers that wanted it. We did it for Vortex. The long-range ballistic program that they ran for a lot of years was ours, that they skinned and ran on their website. And then we also did another one for Leica. That first Leica HDB range-finding binocular used an online program to create a data file that would go on your SD card and plug into the device. So we used it for that one as well. So that had a couple different purposes, and it ran for a long time, but it was made in Flash, and Flash got killed. So it just wasn't worth rewriting it.
Sure.
Because truly, the true use for a ballistic app's on the mobile phone. I mean, how many of our customers don't have a smartphone?
Right. It's
not very many.
Practically 100% saturation.
It's so much easier to use. I mean, having an online interface maybe could offer some value because you could do some heavy duty processing of like a Monte Carlo analysis or something like that. So maybe there's some future use for that. But I feel like the direction is when you're doing ballistic exploration, calculation, range work, etc., or profile management, at the very least, it's mobile phone based.
Sure.
So that's hence the Revic app.
Right.
And after on-device programming with the BR2 and kind of seeing some of the challenges that brought for people, and then wanting to expand our profile into more and more specific things like, powder factors, base wind, zero angle. All of a sudden, you can't do this on the device.
No,
it's just too much. And so having a device connected to your ballistic program and your profile storage and management, so that you can program devices that way, it's the right work stream. It's the right way to go, and it's the obvious solution. So we developed the Revic Ops App to do the operations we need to manage our devices and load profiles and settings and stuff, but also to do independent, ballistic calculations.
Yeah. So really our development process was kind of backwards from where a lot of guys have gone, right? I mean, most of your ballistic apps out there were developed as standalone ballistic apps, right? Instead, we built it for a product, and essentially
when it was first launched, it didn't have a ballistic solver.
It was just the programming.
It was the profile management.
Yeah. So, I mean, you talk about profile management, a pretty big deal, obviously. Being able to build all your different profiles in there. You've got truing, you've got all the different parameters. And obviously using it with the unit as well as a standalone. Where do you feel like that app in particular shines as far as?
Well, again, I think different than everybody else, but when I go use anybody else's app, I get frustrated because the areas that need inputs and require inputs are not organized in a way that matches my brain.
Okay.
So either I'm weird or else the guy that wrote that program's weird.
Sure.
And in a lot of cases, these programs were written by third-party providers.
Right.
Some cases not, but in a lot of cases they were. If they weren't written by third-party providers, they were created using plug-and-play, blocky, out-of-the-box infrastructures for creating generic apps.
Yeah.
Right. And then they plugged their algorithms into the back end of it. And so that also creates limitations. So for me, again, I talk about this all the time, but we always back up and say, well, wait a minute. What are we trying to accomplish? Instead of like the industry usually does, it's like, well, how is this person doing? Yeah. Let's just rip that off and go from there. What I like to do is just back up to the very beginning and say, well, what sucks about everything else? What is the customer or myself trying to achieve? How can we create an interface that is, a better experience for the customer, and then go from there? And if that means we have to code everything from scratch and it costs more money and it sucks for us to do, fine, we're going to do it. Because making concessions to the user experience so that we can save money or to come to market faster is not how we're wired.
Right.
We're just not going to do it.
Yeah.
So the way we organize the app is essentially it's a collection of modules.
Yeah.
So if you go to the app right now, you're going to have like profile modules. You're going to have ballistic calculator. You're going to got the weather station module. You got a truing module.
Yeah.
And then you start getting into some device specific things.
Yeah.
You can sync your devices.
Right.
And we, because of the PMR and the nature of that, we actually have a live view.
Yeah.
And we can see what's on the heads up display in the PMR and send data to it. So that's a cool feature. What we'll see out of the app is we're going to see more modules. Yeah. So this is a total operations device, application. And so we have 4 or 5 new modules that we're planning on doing.
Yeah.
We haven't seen a lot of development over the last probably year, because what we did was we took our iOS app and our Revic app for Android, and we said, let's stop maintaining 2, and we created a unified code base that allows us to publish one program and push it to both. It's a lot easier for us to manage. And the truth is, a ballistic calculation app is easy.
Yeah.
Like it's easy.
Once you got the ballistic engine,
if you're doing Bluetooth communication to devices, it sucks.
Yeah.
That is the challenge.
It gets tricky.
Yeah, it really is the challenge. So that's where a lot of our effort was over this past year, was just getting control of that in a unified code base and anticipating new products. The BR4 was a new product.
Yeah.
It was an iterative step towards our future state of how we manage devices, communicate devices, update devices.
Sure.
Our Gen 2 PMR product that's on its way has another iteration. Some other products have kind of more that final state. So we're pretty excited about how those products interface and integrate with the Revic Ops app. But also, I've put some very serious time into fine-tuning the user experience in getting a ballistic calculation. So if you look at the way the modules are organized and you just go to the profile manager, right? Now, instead of creating this gun and creating this ammo and having these disparate things that you kind of have to jump through these hoops to get where you're going, if you think about a profile as a combination of the weapon system and the ammunition, right? And it's a combination. Now, you can make new combinations of that weapon system and ammo, but the bottom line is a profile equals
this ammo, that right.
Yep. And so if you just expand the menu, you've got your firearm data, you've got your ammunition data. It's super easy. It's very straightforward. One of the coolest things that we just did in this new version that is at the store right now, getting approved. So hopefully we're approved by the end of the month and everybody will have access to it by the 4th of July. We created tooltips.
Awesome.
So you can turn on tooltips, and then when you go into the profile manager and you're looking at this thing, 0 offset elevation, what is that? Right. You just hit the information button. It gives you a definition of that and how to accomplish it. So there are some fairly significant features in the profile module that you need to learn to understand, like 0 angle.
Yep. That's one that's obviously been a soapbox item as of late.
Yeah.
Do we want to maybe talk through a couple of those?
Sure.
Features.
Sure. Absolutely.
Kind of explain.
Absolutely.
I think that's, a lot of guys, we're all using a Ballistic app of some type. And I think we've all run into what is that, or what should I be putting in for that input?
I'm going to be straight up here. Hornady did a great job of exposing lay people to a concept that we were all using on the back end in our ballistic solvers.
Just didn't know it.
Yeah. So the way that traditionally people used it, and just back up, 0 angle is a method for establishing your zeroing conditions so that when you go to another location, you're correcting your ballistic solution, the small amount, but you're correcting for those zeroing conditions.
Yeah.
So if you zeroed your gun at 200 yards at sea level at, 40 degrees, and then you go up on the mountain at 8,000 feet and it's 80 degrees, how much is your point of impact going to change at 200 yards? It's not going to be much.
No, but
half a minute.
But
maybe.
Half a minute at 1,000 yards is significant.
Matters, right? So as we become more sophisticated shooters and we start thinking that we can be effective at distance beyond that half mile, this starts to become more and more prevalent.
Sure.
So the way people have been exposed to 0 angle in the past was they just had like their 0 range, 0 height, and then they would put in all of the parameters, like what was the compass heading, what was the elevation and temperature, all of these details about that shooting session where you zeroed your gun.
Yeah.
What we will do on the back end with that information is we calculate the mechanical relationship between the scope and the barrel.
Sure. Yeah.
Now that relationship is an angle, and if you calculate that angular value, that's your 0 angle. And technically, even when you do a 0 range, like a 100-yard range, you have a 0 angle.
Sure.
Right? It just has some error built into it when you get into some different conditions.
Right.
Because almost all the ballistic calculations are angular based outputs, right? The solutions to those equations yield angles. And so you have this starting condition, which is an angle.
Yeah.
And so all we're doing with the 0 angle routine is exposing that to the customers and allowing them to just click to 0 angle. You find your 0 angle, put in all your shooting conditions, at the time that you zero your gun.
Right.
And then you can calculate that angle, and then you can set it to your profile, and boom, there's your number. In this case, I just calculated a 0.0664 degree 0 angle.
Gotcha.
And now that's your number for your zeroing conditions. And unless you re-zero your scope or change some aspect of that, that will always be your 0 angle. Yeah. So it's a very complex thing, but it's actually super simple. Just go through the steps when you zero your gun, collect the data, calculate the 0 angle, and then you'll have that extra little bit of precision and accuracy in the solution that you're calculating.
So here's a question for me, actually, that I've been meaning to ask you for a long time. It's like on that topic. Obviously, when you're calculating a 0 angle, your sight height is part of that. How important, how accurate do you need to have your sight height input to not be having enough? Here's a perfect question. This is one of the best reasons to have a ballistic calculator. Sure,
is to explore.
Yeah, so test it out.
So go do a ballistic profile.
Yeah,
go to the ballistic calculator. Calculate a solution at 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
Go back to your profile, change it
and
by a quarter inch and see what it does.
I've been meaning to do that and I haven't.
It actually becomes very significant. I think if you think you're going to be shooting in a hunting situation where it really matters beyond 1,000 yards, I think you're probably have to be better than 1/8 of an inch of value on that number.
I think I found myself, and I suspect a lot of guys are the same way, that it's like, oh man, you're plugging it in right there. I don't have my calipers.
It's around 2 inches.
I'll guess, right? And it's like, I've kind of wondered, it's probably not good enough.
If you go do the little exercise, I think you'll find that around 1/8 inch of error is acceptable.
Okay. Yeah. That was good to know. Well, I learned something. Hopefully a few people listening.
It's super easy to test. I always wondered, it's like, what effect does that have? Well, you just plug the number in.
See. Don't have to do the math. Let the app do the math for you, right?
There's two other things that we seem to get a lot of questions on. One of them is elevation adjustment factor.
Yeah.
And the other one is powder factor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those let's call those advanced inputs.
Right.
And the way we have the profile set up is if you don't put anything in, it's fine.
Yeah.
But if you use the value,
right, then it's going to consider it as an input.
Exactly. And the elevation adjustment factor is basically how you deal with click value differences of your scope.
Okay.
Anybody that thinks a rifle scope click is exactly 0.25, or 0.1 MRAD, like they're not.
Every manufacturer has an acceptable margin error in that, a tolerance, right?
Yeah.
In their click values.
It can be 5% or more.
Yeah.
Our PMR, I think we tested to 2%.
Yeah.
Over 40 minutes. And that's another thing that's a factor, is you might have like the middle 20 minutes is pretty good, but then it starts changing as you get out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it may not be a linear thing either.
Yeah.
Maybe you said this. So is that put in as a percentage? Or is it?
It is basically if you pull up the tooltip, it tells you what it is, scales the calculated angular output of the solver. To calculate your elevation adjustment factor, do a tall target test and divide the actual travel by the expected travel.
Yeah.
So if it was supposed to go 10 minutes, but it went 9 minutes, that is a 0.9.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
And if you do a tall target test, instead of calculating it out in a truing step,
right,
then you'll end up with a lot better fit on your ballistic curve.
On your curve.
Because if you true without correcting for click value errors, you're technically fixing it in a rough, forced manner.
But you're fixing different parameters.
And it might only be good in a certain range. And so you'll see some differences at distance,
right,
where you're not able to fit it perfectly.
I would strongly suspect that there are a lot of guys truing their ballistics off of changing their BCs and their velocities.
It's a known thing that we have actually. It's an acceptable way to do it if you're shooting sub 1,000 yards.
Sure.
Like, so if you're building a ballistic turret, it's acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're trying to shoot something at 1,500 yards, you're probably going to have to go click value. Okay, so that's one. The other one is powder factor.
Yeah.
And we've worked really, really hard to do temperature stable powders in our ammunition just to eliminate this as a consideration.
Yeah.
But if you look at most of the powders that exist today that are attainable, you're going to have some variation. So, and what that means is at 0 degrees, it shoots this velocity.
Yeah.
But if it's 100 degrees, it shoots a different velocity.
Right.
And what you have to do to use powder factor is you have to have two things. Number one, you have to have the ratio. How much does it change per degree?
Sure.
That's easy. So you put it in the freezer, put it on the bench. You got a 60-degree temperature difference. It moves 60 feet per second.
Right.
You've got a 1 feet per second per degree powder factor.
Sure. And
that's actually not that crazy. That's actually
reasonable.
Yeah, it's comparable to some of those powders. Okay, well that's your powder factor.
Okay.
But you have a muzzle velocity that you start with in your profile.
Yeah.
What is the temperature that your powder was at that you collected that velocity? So that is the piece that throws a lot of people off. So when you collect your muzzle velocity, you have to define what the powder temperature was. So now you know where you start on that scale.
Sure.
So then if you go up in temperature or down in temperature from there, we know how to manipulate the muzzle velocity in the calculation so you get a good result.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I would say those are probably the three hardest things to understand. But if you look at our Ballistic app, we kind of set it up to work just like the devices. There's kind of an easy mode.
Sure.
And then there's all these Easter eggs
power user kind of
that you can uncover. And so if you don't know what it is, don't use it, don't put a value in.
Yeah.
And the device will tell you, hey, you actually need to use this one.
Sure.
Right? So if you try to complete the profile and it's not complete, it'll put a question mark on it and it won't let you use it for anything.
Yeah.
And so it tells you to go in and it'll highlight in orange and show, hey, you need to use a value here. Yeah. So it's kind of easy mode is do everything that you know. And if it's not good enough, the app will tell you need just a little bit more. And anything that's a power user, advanced calculation related item, it won't require you to put in.
Gotcha. Zero angle is another, or sorry, not zero angle. Truing is another one that's come up quite a bit.
I still feel like we have more optimization that we could do in our truing module.
Okay.
But if you think about it, all the truing module is doing is you're telling the computer what your gun does.
Right. Giving it real world data.
So let's say you shoot a 0 to 100 yards and you're right on.
Yeah.
And then you shoot at 800 yards and the app says you need 20 minutes and you're like 21 minutes.
Yeah. Right.
Well, that means something's wrong in your velocity or your BC. Mm-hmm. Well, let's say you used a magneto speed and you're like, well, I'm pretty sure this number's right.
Yeah.
Well, then I would say, well, why don't you shoot that drop data again without the chronograph on there and just double check and make sure you're happy with your numbers.
Yeah.
So once you're sure of that performance, then you just go to the truing app and all you do is you tell it in these conditions, right? Pressure, temperature, azimuth, all that. In these conditions, my far target range was this, and this is the correction that I dialed in, and this is where my bullet hit.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you had to dial 21 minutes, but you were still 2 inches low to the center of your group, your far target range would say 800, your adjustment would say 21 minutes, and your POI offset, your point of impact offset, would be -2.
Sure.
And so when you put that data in, then you calculate a solution. All it does is it does a brute force method of adjusting either the BC or the velocity so that second point, that far target range would be right on.
And it's actually adjusting the BC or velocity for you when it's doing that.
Yeah.
How does it decide which to use?
You get a pick. So once you have enough data for it to do the solution, it automatically calculates the BC and velocity and it shows you what it is. And then you can set one or the other. And when you set it, it goes back to your profile and adjusts it in the profile. So you don't have to type any numbers. You just hit the button and say, set that one. And then it's always cool to go back to the Ballistic solver and then put the numbers in and say, oh, yep, there it is. It's exactly right.
That's pretty handy because then you can say, I'm more confident that my velocity is right. Like, you're using your magneto or whatever. Pretty nice.
Yeah. Generally, the if you use the chronographs right, it's kind of like a rangefinder. It's going to give you a good number.
Yeah.
If you get a good number, you kind of want to stick with those.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're doing this without a chronograph and you're just fudging it in and you kind of know what you can pick the bullet from the list and you can walk it in that way. There's so many things that change BC, whether it's your initial muzzle velocity or your twist rate or your land groove configuration, even your muzzle brake. All of those things affect your BC. So it's more likely that you want to adjust your ballistic coefficient to make those fit. But you got to do some stuff. Like, we're pretty advanced. We'll let you turn on aerodynamic jump, spin drift, and all those things. And make sure you put in your wind vectors and all that, and it will accommodate like aerodynamic jump, Eötvös effect, and all that.
Sure.
So my only advice for using the truing module is, number one, make sure that the data you think your gun is shooting is really the data.
Sure.
Don't shoot 1 or 2 times.
Yeah.
Shoot a good sample size and measure the actual statistical center of that group.
Yeah.
It's worth doing that extra effort. Shoot when there's no wind if you can.
Yeah.
But if there is wind, put in all of the conditions as good as you can for what you are shooting in.
Yeah.
The average conditions, and that'll help kind of back out some of those other effects and get you a good truing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
By the way, I don't know if you know this, the BR4 has truing on the device.
It does, and I shouldn't admit this in public. I have not used it in the device.
It's so easy to do in the app. Yeah. It's like, why not do it in the app?
Yeah.
But it's there. And the reason why we did that is you do not have manual input control
Yeah.
So what if you are away from your app?
Sure.
And you are in the field and you need to fix it.
Sure.
So it's kind of a last ditch effort to true up.
Nice feature to have. And I need to get a little bit more familiar with it. You know, I tend to do the same things, I think, manually rather than use the automated features, but it's pretty awesome feature to have in there.
Yeah. When you need it, you'll need it.
Yeah. Any other kind of pet topics on the app that get you all excited?
You know, I think if the user will go have some experience around it, I think what you'll find is that the profile management is superior.
Yeah.
When you get to the actual calculation of ballistics, you're just putting in your wind and your range. Sure. It's like, how sophisticated can that be? We give you a lot of options for turning on and off advanced corrections or how you use your wind. We've kind of solidified our wind nomenclature. If you're using clock position, it's shooter relative. And if you're using degrees, it's absolute.
Right.
And that's worth reading about and understanding because it's a fairly sophisticated topic, but it's back to that, base wind, vector wind.
Yeah.
It's kind of there's two different methodologies there to try to fit, your use case and style. But there's some stuff to understand there. But I think you go to the profile management and start creating profiles, you'll realize that it is vastly superior to the methodologies a lot of other people's use in their products. And for the new one, try the QR code share.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's been a feature that's been requested a lot.
It is going to be the fastest copied feature in our product.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing someone's not done it yet, to be honest. But yeah, I mean,
no, it's not easy.
Oh, well,
that's why nobody's done it. It was a massive lift and headache.
Really?
And we're not just sending, we do Doppler file stuff.
Sure.
So in that QR code,
it contains all of that.
You can't just send this BC number. You literally have to send this whole data file, and it's big.
It's big.
We're going to use that in a lot of cool applications, but that QR product share, and then we do have the cloud upload. So you can sign in, you can store all your profiles in the cloud so you never lose them on updates or anything like that. So
awesome.
The profile management's nice.
Pretty cool.
Very nice.
Good. Well, I appreciate you jumping on and talking app today. I think that's a valuable tool that probably not as enough it's free, right?
Yeah.
And probably not enough of our guys are using, whether they're running a Revic device or not. It's there to use. So take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, jump on the App Store, iOS or Android, and it's free there to download. All right. Thanks, Aaron.
Welcome.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram or send us an email to podcast@gunwerks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunwerks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.